Welcome to the Three and Out podcast. I am your host, Brian Perez, and I want to thank you for giving up part of your morning, afternoon, or evening to give this a listen. I'm excited about the show and what we're going to be bringing to you guys on hopefully a weekly or every other week basis. The show is exactly what the title suggests it is. We're going to cover 4 topics throughout the world of the NFL draft, the NFL, maybe fantasy football, whatever is kind of circulating its way through social media and the football community. Obviously, the focus of the show will be on the NFL draft, since that is primarily what I spend almost all of my time on during the course of the football year. But we'll dive into some other stuff too as it warrants. Hopefully, we'll have some guests on the show as well throughout the NFL draft season. We'll bring on a lot of the draft breakdown analysts to kind of throw back and forth some opinions, see where they stand on certain players, maybe get their most recent mock drafts, and again, just review and analyze what the current narratives are that are forming around the NFL draft in general. This 3 and Out podcast is going to be part of a bigger picture family of podcasts now on draftbreakdown.com, which, if I can kind of touch on that for a second, it's almost a year now that I've been part of the ownership group of Draft Breakdown, and it's been just a phenomenal 10 months and counting. Obviously, as you guys know, Draft Breakdown has become the premier destination for all of us to go to for scouting players. The prospect video cut-ups have been an invaluable resource to everybody in the industry, and it's been really cool from my perspective being able to watch first as a fan and visit the site just to do my own personal work study, and now on the other side of the table being part of the ownership team and helping the site expand to the heights that we're starting to reach. And obviously the site's model is evolving to go beyond just the prospect video cut-ups. I mean, the team of senior draft analysts, the experts that we have writing for the site, are second to none. The content that they're putting out every week this year during this college football season has been just phenomenal. I mean, I'm in awe of it. I'm reading it like a fan, not just part of the site itself. And now, obviously, we're introducing this family of podcasts. First, the official Draft Breakdown podcast, which is hosted by Seth Cox, Justin Higdon, and Justice Mosqueda. That's already 2 episodes deep, and you could find that on draftbreakdown.com. You should be able to subscribe to on iTunes very soon. This podcast, 3 and Out, will also be part of that cluster of shows that we're going to be bringing you under one main subscription on iTunes. And Kyle Krabs of NDT Scouting, and he also does obviously some analysis for the site on the written side of things. He's going to be bringing his podcast into this family of shows. So it continues the evolution of the Draft Breakdown brand. We're going beyond just the prospect video cut-ups. We're now bringing you great written content, and now hopefully some stuff that you can listen to on your ride home from work as well. This show specifically, 3 and Out, is going to have 2 different approaches. Obviously, this video that some of you might be watching on Draft Breakdown itself, as well as the audio, which can be subscribed to on iTunes. So who knows? Whatever your viewing or listening pleasure, 3 and Out will bring it to you. Make sure you give the video guys, we talk about this a lot on Twitter, the Draft Breakdown video team. They're the hardest working guys in the draft industry, and unfortunately a lot of them are anonymous. I mean, some of you guys out there may not even know who some of the most active contributors are to the site. So please take note of that pinned tweet that the Draft Breakdown main account has, where it lists a lot of the video editors, and throw those guys a follow. And obviously, if you'd like to join the conversation with me after this show, my Twitter handle is @BrianPerez_DB. That's Brian with a Y. Throw me a follow and let me know what you thought of some of the topics that we covered today, and obviously whether you agree or disagree about my opinion. And let's start right there. Let's look at some of these opinions that are floating around the NFL draft community right now, and the most prevailing theme that we've seen over the last couple of days has been that of Leonard Fournette. Is Leonard Fournette a guy who physically is capable of bucking the system and being that sophomore prospect who is capable of declaring for the NFL draft and beating the system that's in place right now? You guys all know The rule is 3 years removed from your high school graduation. You could be a redshirt sophomore. That's pretty much the youngest you can be, or the earliest in your collegiate career that you could be before you can declare for the NFL draft. 3 years removed from high school. It doesn't matter if you're 22, 20, 19. You have to be 3 years removed from your high school graduation. Leonard Fournette is a true sophomore. At the end of this season, he will only be 2 years removed from his high school graduation, which is why we have this issue, right? This issue is only here because Leonard Fournette is 1 year shy of declaring for the NFL draft. But what Leonard Fournette has done this year in terms of his production has been off the charts. And it's not as if this is coming out of nowhere. Leonard Fournette started his collegiate career as one of the highest profile running back recruits to come along in a long time. So it's something that has been more or less on the radar for the last 3 years, really, that this could be a potential situation if he produced the way everybody expected he would coming out of high school, and he certainly has done that. I mean, let's look at just the last 3 games so far in this college football season. He's eclipsed 200 yards. You know, the narrative is out there. He's the first SEC running back in the history of the conference to do that. Bo Jackson hasn't done it. Bo Jackson never did it. Herschel Walker never did it. But here we are, Leonard Fournette, 20-year-old sophomore running back, 3 straight games in the toughest conference in football. He's gone over 200 yards. But what does this mean? I mean, is he a guy that the NFL should suddenly open its doors to? Well, let's take a look back before we look forward. Has the NFL ever done anything like this before? Has the NFL ever allowed a player who on his face wasn't technically eligible to enter the NFL draft, but ultimately got in? The conventional argument is no, and people will refer back to Maurice Clarett as the guy, right? The guy who tried to fight the NFL. He lost, and some would argue that decision to try to fight the league and ultimately the fact that he lost may have derailed his career, missing that year, falling out of shape, whatever the other excuses may be. I personally just don't think he was that good, but whatever the other excuses might be, that was a big blow to any future that he possibly could have had in the NFL. But there is a name that nobody's bringing up, at least not that I've seen on Draft Twitter. You can tweet me and correct me if other people have cited this, but if you go back to that same year, the same class as Maurice Clarett, and you look at Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald, when he declared for the NFL draft, was a true sophomore, a 20-year-old true sophomore. He petitioned the NFL to allow him to enter the draft despite not being in his redshirt sophomore season or junior year. And he ultimately was allowed, obviously, admission into the draft because of a very unique argument that he made, which technically is true. After he graduated high school, as some of you may or may not know, Larry Fitzgerald attended Valley Forge Military Academy, basically an extra year of high school, okay? So he went to Pitt a year later than he could have. His argument to the NFL was, listen, I may only be in my second year of college, but the graduating class that I should have graduated with, but for my decision to go to this extra year of a military academy, the graduating class that I should have been with is 3 years ago. I am 3 years removed from that class. Let me enter the draft. And the NFL made an exception for him. Now, Larry Fitzgerald wasn't a physical freak. I mean, he was a great-looking prospect, but he wasn't some anomaly guy that comes along once in a generation from a size, speed, physicality standpoint. He was 20 years old. He wasn't 23 years old and more mature than the average sophomore. He was a young kid. And he was a true sophomore. The NFL let him in because of this loophole that he was able to articulate, which said basically, I am technically 3 years removed from my high school graduating class, despite the fact that I had an additional year of high school by my own choice at that military academy. And it just got me thinking about what kind of arguments can be made for some of these true sophomores along the lines of Larry Fitzgerald. It's interesting because I just went through this in my own personal life. My wife and I have a 6-year-old son. And my wife is a stay-at-home mother, and she has a lot of stay-at-home mom friends, and they all talk about all this stay-at-home mom stuff. And one of the things that came up, especially for the people who had sons at around 5, 6 years old, was keeping them back intentionally in kindergarten, allowing them these boys to have an additional year of kindergarten. The reasoning behind it was, number one, maturity, so they are more mature and able to handle what comes along with, the academic expectations in first grade and second grade, which I know sounds completely bizarre, but I'm going through it right now. My son is in first grade, and the workload is pretty intense for how small these kids are. That being said, so these mothers, these fathers, and there were several of them who intentionally kept their sons back in kindergarten for a second year of kindergarten because of academics. And some of the fathers were honest with me and said, hey, you know what? I want them to have an edge in sports. I want my son to be the old 18, early 19-year-old as a senior in high school. I want them to have that physical edge. There's a lot of kids right now that are true sophomores in college that probably got left back somewhere along their elementary or middle school years. I believe an argument can be made for some of those kids. Hey, I had that extra year, quote unquote. The class I should have been with graduated 3 years ago. I'm a 20-year-old sophomore, just like a Larry Fitzgerald was. And that same argument could be made that my graduating class, in terms of biology, was 3 years earlier than, or a year earlier than my diploma might suggest. But I think all that could be ignored. And truly, I do think there could be a strong argument that could be made there. Maybe I'm living out on Mars with this, but I truly believe that an argument could be made there if you look at the Larry Fitzgerald case and you say, well, he added a year on the back end or front end, whatever you want to call it. At the very end of his academic career, he went to grade 13, basically, instead of graduating grade 12. Some of the kids in this school district, in the school system in this day and age, repeat grade 3, take on that 13th year. It's the same technical argument that you can make for some of these guys. And a guy like Leonard Fournette, he's a 20-year-old sophomore. I'm curious as to whether or not he had the extra year in elementary school somewhere. Maybe his family started him a year later than he should have started. I don't know what is involved there, but he is an older sophomore, so maybe there could be some wiggle room with that argument for not just Fournette, but other guys down the pipeline. I personally think this whole situation can be avoided by not making it a years removed from high school requirement to enter the NFL draft. It's simple. Just make it an age. You have to be 20 years old to enter the NFL draft. There are plenty of juniors and redshirt sophomores that have come into the NFL at 20 years old. The list is endless if we want to put statistics out there regarding 20-year-old guys that enter the NFL. They're not too young. They're not too small. They're not too physically, undeveloped. And if that's the case, then they go back to school. I mean, it's a simple fix beyond that. But the reality is 20-year-olds enter the league all the time. Make it 20 years old. If you're 20 years old at the end of your sophomore year and before you have to declare for the NFL draft, you're eligible, whether you're a true sophomore, redshirt sophomore, whatever the case might be. It would be easy, simple, across the board, no debate, no issue, 20 years old. Because for Fournette, it's a serious debate that he has to have because of the nature of his position, the fact that the general theme over the last couple of years has been that the running back position has gotten devalued. So if you have this peak level of stock that you're riding right now, at a position that probably has the lowest level of value, you have to cash out on that as soon as possible. You can't sit here and assume that next year this time that value will remain. I decided to take a look back at some of the guys who reminded me of a Leonard Fournette in terms of the hype that built around them through their collegiate career and some of the issues that we're hearing now at Fournette, like the number of carries and the physical style that he runs with. He's going to wear down, and that's going to impact his ability to truly be a high draft pick. I decided to look at some of the guys in the last, let's say, I don't know how far back I went, 15 drafts, 15 years, to try to find running backs that are along the same storylines. And I found 4 that I think fit Leonard Fournette's situation. It's 4 guys that I remember the theme around their class being volume of carries, physical running style, or a combination of the two. And those 4 guys are Shaun Alexander, when he was coming out of Alabama, drafted by the Seattle Seahawks in the first round. Adrian Peterson, coming out of Oklahoma, drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the first round. Ricky Williams and Cedric Benson, both coming out of Texas, drafted by the Saints and the Bears, respectively, in the first round. So let's look at some of those numbers. Shaun Alexander, when he graduated college, at 727 carries. Adrian Peterson, 748 carries. Ricky Williams, 1,011 collegiate carries. And Cedric Benson, an astonishing 1,112 collegiate carries. As of right now, when you look at the pace that Leonard Fournette is on, he's currently has 99 carries on the season. He's averaging about 25 carries a game. He's on pace for roughly 297 carries. He had 187 carries last year. So if these numbers hold true, at the end of this season, he'll have 484 carries on his resume. And at this rate, if he keeps this rate up, he'll have about 780 to 800 carries on his resume by the end of next college football season. Right in that range of a Shaun Alexander, of Adrian Peterson. He's right in that wheelhouse. That carry total did not impact those guys in terms of first-round value. And those 2 guys were pretty durable. Adrian Peterson is a freak. And if you think Leonard Fournette is cut from the same cloth, then he'll be a durable freak as well. So you can't worry about that 800 carry number, more or less, as being something that's really going to hurt his long-term NFL shelf life, because if you comp him to Adrian Peterson's been fine. Shaun Alexander was a little bit different of a runner. I don't think he was nearly as talented as Leonard Fournette. He ran behind one of the best left sides of an offensive line in NFL history during his time in the NFL, and he wasn't necessarily a physical, punishing player. Ricky Williams, Cedric Benson, those 2 guys are very similar to Fournette in terms of how they finish runs. They did not avoid contact in college. Every one of those 1,000, 1,100 carries were physical until they were brought to the ground. And those 2 guys dealt with some durability issues. Ricky Williams, early in his career, had issues staying on the field. Cedric Benson, really throughout his entire career, had issues both on and off the field, but specifically on the field, he had a hard time staying healthy. That carry volume did catch up to those guys, in my opinion, in the pros. Ricky Williams had a great career. I'm not saying he didn't, but Benson clearly left a lot to be desired. So I don't think Fournette is in that danger zone of carry numbers, assuming that it doesn't get ridiculous in terms of how much LSU uses him. If he obviously had that 4th year to go back, he would be in that Cedric Benson and Ricky Williams territory, and then you really do have to pump the brakes a little bit in terms of how much you think he'll last or how long you think he'll last in the NFL. But for purposes of the trajectory he's on right now, he'll probably be all right. But it doesn't change the fact of the guy's ready to play in the league right now. I mean, he's ready to play. The collegiate football players, the defensive players that he's going up against every week are afraid to tackle this guy. I mean, you could see it. They're playing on their heels. Nobody wants to take him on, and he's making them pay. I mean, a guy doesn't run for over 200 yards in 3 straight games the way he's doing in just grown man fashion, unless you are an NFL player playing on the college level. When you look for a guy that's special, at least when I'm scouting talent, when I'm looking or seeing somebody that's kind of entering that special territory, the first thing you need to look for, the first thing that jumps out at you, is, does this guy look like he came from the NFL, put on a college uniform, and is playing against a bunch of kids, just toying with them, making them look foolish, making them look silly? If you have a player that is able to do that while they're technically in college, that is a potentially special talent. Leonard Fournette looks like he's the starting running back for, I don't know, let's just make up the Green Bay Packers, and he's decided to play some football on Saturdays at LSU. That's what he looks like. And that's special. That's hard to find. You don't get that very often. It happened with Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson looked like he came from the Minnesota Vikings and decided to play for Oklahoma on Saturdays. I mean, that's the type of talent these guys exhibit on the field. And Fournette is doing that. So forget that he's 20. I mean, if you want to argue that he's 20 years old and he's not physically ready, well, we'll show you a whole laundry list of 20-year-olds who have played in the NFL, who have declared, whether they've hit or not. Guys do it. Just look at how he's playing. I mean, look at the on-field production. Fournette is a rare, special talent at 20 years old. Okay, whether or not he's going to be a Hall of Fame NFL running back, nobody knows. I mean, is he a little bit tight in the hips? Does he have special traits? Does every single box check off as special? No, he doesn't. But what he's doing is very rare and very unique, and he has that intangible quality where you can see that he is destined to be a bell cow running back in the NFL. I say let the guy play. Don't make this kid sit out. Don't make this kid have to go through another year of college football and risk potentially injuring and derailing a career path that we all want to watch and enjoy on Sundays. It's pie in the sky. It's not going to happen unless he has some creative counsel on his side that can raise some kind of loophole like the Larry Fitzgerald team did over a decade ago. Let's go to second down. Jared Goff, quarterbacks, college football. It's always fun to talk quarterbacks. It's always fun when an NFL draft has a quarterback that gets your juices flowing, right? And unfortunately, I think what happens with the NFL draft community is this quench, this unsatisfiable quench for, or thirst, I should say. What I'm saying, quench. This thirst for the quarterback, right? Last year, it hit beautifully. Marcus Mariota and Jameis Winston. We didn't just have one. We had two quarterbacks to get excited about. Two good quarterbacks, two good prospects. It was a great debate all winter, early spring. I mean, it was fun. It made the draft great. It added drama all the way up until the draft itself. We didn't know, is Tampa Bay definitely going Winston? Oh, now Tennessee's on the clock. Is Philadelphia, the Bears, these late rumors about who is potentially going to trade up to take Marcus Mariota. The narrative of he's a system quarterback, the Chip Kelly offense. He's not going to be transition. He's not going to transition well into the NFL. All these debates. And now we're watching on Sundays, and both players have shown some good and shown some bad, but they look like they're going to stick in the NFL. It was a lot of fun, and it made the draft a lot of fun. So it's really hard to follow that up, especially when the two players at that position last year were truly blue-chip guys. This year, I think what's happening is a little bit more like the Geno Smith draft, where everybody thought Geno Smith after the month of September was going to be a first pick overall candidate. Everybody thought Geno Smith after October, November was still a first-round guy. And then the wheels slowly started coming off with Geno Smith. There wasn't a lot of fanfare surrounding Geno Smith once we got into December, and the statistics just started nosediving, and then we went through the draft process, and it just didn't, those of us who really study the draft kind of just knew or felt like it's going to be a little bit of a long shot for Geno Smith to get into the first round. And ultimately, Geno Smith's career is far from being fully defined, but he looks probably like he's going to be a backup quarterback in the NFL. This year's class reminds me a little bit of that, with a little sprinkling of Teddy Bridgewater, in that Jared Goff is a player who I think has the ability and the natural arm talent to actually skyrocket all the way into top 5 territory, top 5 pick territory. He's got the height, he's got the smarts, he's got the footwork, he's got the pocket presence, he makes every single throw. He might be a little inconsistent at times with his ball placement, and sometimes, as some of the other analysts on Draft Breakdown have referenced, the ball might flutter out of his hands at times, but the kid's got it. He's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, and if he continues to do what he's been doing this year, I personally think he can get into that top 5 category. He led Cal to a great comeback win last week against Washington State, put up huge numbers. He's got 70% completion percentage pretty much across the board as a starter. He's over 70% this year. 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions on the season. Almost that 4-to-1 touchdown to interception rate, which is a benchmark number for me. It has to at least be 4-to-1. If you're not at 4-to-1, I question the production. I know stats can be deceiving. Box score especially is the most deceiving statistic, the most deceiving analytic or tool or resource that a scout can use is the box score. But there are some old school stats that carry weight and that do mean something for specific positions. And in my opinion, the touchdown to interception ratio is important because it shows that number one, the quarterback is maximizing opportunities, getting the ball in the end zone, not making mistakes often. He's 4 times more likely to throw a touchdown than he is in an interception. I mean, think about that just logically. If a quarterback has a 4-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, that means more likely than not, forget about all the other specific statistics, he is 4 times more likely in a game to throw a touchdown than an interception. That is persuasive to me. That's something I pay attention to. If you're 2 times more likely to throw a touchdown than an interception, I get a little nervous. If it's a 1-to-1 ratio, I mean, that's garbage. But 4 times more likely to throw a touchdown than an interception, that's impressive. So is Goff in a class of his own? Is he a guy that he's our only hope as a draft community, as draft analysts? Is Jared Goff the only guy that's going to give us a chance to see another first-round quarterback this year? Maybe. I know some people are down on Connor Cook all of a sudden. I don't see any reason why they should be. Connor Cook, to me, is the quarterback that nobody is going to be wowed by. Everybody's going to jump on the fact that he wasn't named captain this year or chosen as a captain this year. He doesn't have the rocket cannon of an arm. He's not going to make the pretty passes like Jared Goff is going to make, especially in shorts and a t-shirt. But the guy's got good film. And if you're an old school film junkie like I am, you say to yourself, he's got good film. I mean, this is a player that you would project as a starting quarterback in the NFL. No doubt about it. So if you are projected as a starting quarterback in the NFL, there's a very good chance you're going to go in the first round. Connor Cook fits that prototype. Again, he's got the size, he's got the experience, he's got the smarts. I like what Connor Cook brings to the table. So hopefully by the end of this draft cycle, we'll see at least 2 guys pushing for first-round consideration. I don't really think at this point, beyond those 2, we're going to see another name that jumps into the top 32 mix. Jacoby Brissett is a guy I'm excited about, a player I really liked watching this summer, and I think he could rise into day 2, maybe even early day 2 status, but to think that he'll get into the first round, I think that's a little rich for where he's at right now. Jared Goff, I like him, and I think Jared Goff is going to definitely have a tough decision to make at the end of the season, and that's funny. It's funny that Goff ended up being, pretty much the magnet that brought Greg Gabriel and Draft Twitter at odds again this week. I wrote a little piece about this drama on Draft Breakdown earlier in the week, or actually late in last week. And I know Justin Higdon touched on it too in the Draft Breakdown podcast. But I just found it so odd, the way Mr. Gabriel conducts himself on Twitter and in an environment where, we all could learn a lot from him. I mean, if you think about his experience and what he's seen and accomplished in his tenure in the NFL, having him being part of the draft conversation should be really pleasurable and something that all of us should want to engage in. And when I started participating in draft Twitter a couple of years ago, and I saw that Greg Gabriel was part of the community, being a Chicago Bears fan, knowing intimately the guys he picked and guys, his hits, his misses, whatever you might want to call it, since he was the director of college scouting for a period of time with the Bears, I was really interested to read about his opinions and see what his takes were on things. And it just became this overwhelming theme of negativity and attacks, and I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why somebody like him feels the need to be so on the defensive about himself and on the attack when it comes to other people who may have different opinions than him. And it just had me wondering what it must have been like to be part of that organization, to work for somebody. I mean, not necessarily him specifically, but to work for someone who has this superiority complex to where, you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to be on the same level. You're never going to have the same level of accountability. It just seems as if it must have been it would be a really difficult environment, and it must have been a really difficult environment to be a scout for the Chicago Bears for that number of years. That's specifically based on this draft Twitter persona that he puts out there. I don't know him personally, and to be quite honest, based on the way I've seen his approach to people on Twitter, I mean, it's not appealing. It's not appealing to even want to get to know somebody like that. But again, everybody carries themselves their own ways, and it was funny that Jared Goff, he wrote a piece about Jared Goff on the National Football Post that said basically how he would recommend that Jared Goff go back for his senior year. It's just important for quarterbacks to have those game reps and that game experience, and I completely agree. I mean, I think quarterbacks that have 4 years on their resume and have seen rep after rep after rep in college football, come into the NFL much more prepared to step onto the field and succeed earlier. But, it ain't that simple. There is a whole business model behind these guys' decisions that goes beyond simply, enhancing your resume with 12 or 13 more starts. If the market suggests that Jared Goff is the best quarterback in the draft, and the landscape of the draft likely predicts that there will be quarterback-needy teams in the top 10, and Jared Goff grades out as a likely top 20 prospect, he's going in the top 10. And there's no way in the world that anybody is going to go back, or anybody should go back to school for a fourth year if they've maximized top 10 pick value. There are only so many Andrew Lucks walking the planet who can make that bold of a decision to go back for their senior year, knowing it doesn't matter. I mean, I will be the number one pick overall whenever I decide to come out. There are not many people like Andrew Luck on this planet. Jared Goff looks like he's about to maximize his draft value, much like a guy we talked about a few moments ago in Leonard Fournette. Jared Goff is about to maximize his draft value, and there's no reason, in my opinion, if he maintains the season he's been having so far and he continues to do and enjoy the success that he's had through the first 5 games of the season, there's no reason why he should go back for his senior year. I disagree with Greg. Jared Goff has played for 3 years, 3 years as a starter, and he's ready. I mean, he's ready to come in, maybe not start, sit behind an established veteran for a year or two, and let the NFL have it in 2017. And there's plenty of teams right now with that veteran stopgap quarterback that are looking for that young guy that they would invest a first-rounder on. My Chicago Bears are a perfect example. Jay Cutler will probably still be a Bear next year, but the team is clearly looking to build a foundation of young players. Jared Goff could be that guy. Would it be awkward and uncomfortable for Jay Cutler to be a young quarterback's mentor? Yeah, that would be odd, and that would be quite the storyline to follow throughout the season, and that would be a tremendous hard knocks if HBO was ever able to get their hands on that one. But that's an example of a team that probably would go that route and take the young quarterback to sit behind the veteran that you know you're not going to be committed to for beyond a year or two after the 2016 draft. So in my opinion, Jared Goff, barring any kind of catastrophic meltdown, come out. Third down, Myles Jack declared for the NFL draft. He withdrew from UCLA. He's going to focus on his rehab of his knee injury so that he's fully healthy and prepared for the draft process come, the end of the season, into the combine, pro days, and whatnot. I was taken back today after reading a lot of Jim Mora's comments about Mac and his less than 100% support, it seemed like, at least, for the decision that Mac was making. I was really shocked that a head coach would go as far as to basically say that he's making a mistake by declaring for the draft. Mora didn't come out and say that directly, but the reality is, if you read between the lines of what Jim Mora said, he said without saying it, Myles Jack should not declare for the NFL draft. He talked about the limited reps on tape, where the NFL guys don't necessarily know where Jack's going to play. If you're not a sure thing at a certain position, teams are going to be very cautious in the first round. They're not going to invest in a player where they don't know necessarily where they're going to play him. I mean, it sounds to me like it's the girlfriend that just got dumped and she's trying to make every excuse under the sun as to why the boyfriend should take her back. Or the boyfriend that just got dumped and he's making every excuse under the sun why the girlfriend should take him back. It's, a coach that probably expected his star player to come back one more year, and he was hit with news that he was hoping he wouldn't hear. He's obviously distraught and upset that he lost arguably the best athlete on his team. He probably figured going into next year with the superstar young quarterback that he has, you bring back a superstar defensive talent, and you got a chance to really make a run deep into the playoff race. And here he is, on October 6th, having to sit up there at Myles Jack and put on his best happy face and show whatever support he can muster that his star defensive player is turning pro. I thought it was pretty classless. I don't want to go too extreme here, but I thought Mora could have been a little more professional, shown a little more support for Jack. I think eventually, these kind of comments could hurt him in a recruiting trip. If I'm a parent of a player, I would be concerned as to why Mora didn't show more unconditional support. Behind the scenes, say what you want to Myles Jack. Behind the scenes, say what you want to his parents. Behind the scenes, you tell him, look, the NFL guys, I spent half my life in the NFL. I know how these guys think. They're going to look at you with more questions than answers. To say that at a podium and a mic to reporters, now it's all over the internet. It's just that's just not, as they say, cool. And I don't see why he would do that. Plus, listen, the reality is, Myles Jack is going to be a first-round pick. I mean, Myles Jack could limp his way into the first round. There's no doubt in my mind. When you watch Myles Jack play, he's one of these exceptional athletes that transcends positional fit in the NFL. He's going to fit. A defensive coordinator will find a fit for him. It doesn't matter where you line up Myles Jack. He's going to be an impact player. He's going to make plays for you in the NFL. He's Kyle Krabs, one of our senior analysts on Draft Breakdown at NDT Scouting. I think one of the descriptive terms he used for Myles Jack in one of his tweets was violent. He's a violent player. And man, I couldn't put it any better than that. Watching Myles Jack explode into guys that are trying to block him, it almost makes you want to look away from the screen because it is almost an act of violence. And it's not because he's, just a guy, running around like a chicken with his head cut off. He's just such an explosive athlete that an NFL defensive coordinator is going to look at him like his new sports cards, his new Ferrari. He's like that franchise running back for a defense. You're going to be able to put him on a field on the field all 3 downs and let this guy wreak havoc. He's going to be a first-round pick. So Jim Mora, sorry, bud, but there's no chance, there's absolutely no way that the NFL is going to look at Myles Jack and say, he is an absolutely dominating force on defense. He is just a freakishly gifted athlete, but we really don't know exactly where we're going to play him, so let's take a chance that he's still sitting there in the 3rd round. Not going to happen. He's going to be a top 32 pick. Myles Jack made the right call. Don't go back to college football for another year, possibly tear up your knee again, and then honestly, you're looking at day 3 status versus top 32 pick. So good call, Myles Jack. Jim Mora, wish you would have handled it a little differently. Now we come to the final down, the 4th down, and we didn't have a good drive, so we're going to be punting the ball here. And I touched on this a little bit in the article that I wrote on Draft Breakdown last week. Daily fantasy sports. And ironically, over the last couple of days, the daily fantasy sports industry is getting hit hard by this allegation of potential insider, I don't know what you want to call it, using inside information, swapping sites, and winning money and all this stuff going on, these allegations that these DFS insiders are using information to their advantage. First of all, I don't know how that's possible. What inside information do these guys have regarding human performance on a football field? I mean, do they just, again, and I admit I'm a novice when it comes to daily fantasy sports, so I don't know necessarily what kind of information would be helpful to these guys. I mean, is it based on, hey, 85% of people are playing Eddie Lacy, but only 15% are playing Devonta Freeman, so play Devonta Freeman and you got a better chance at winning $350,000. I mean, is that how it works? I don't know. Somebody tweet me at @BrianPerez_DB. Please let me know. But I just find it ironic that the industry of, well, I shouldn't say the industry because the fantasy sports industry isn't represented by daily fantasy sports and this ridiculous marketing campaign, but this daily fantasy sports genre has put an all-out assault on the consumer to the point where they've basically monopolized the commercial airtime on NFL Sundays. And now we're only 4 weeks into the season, and there's already potential issues involving FanDuel or DraftKings or whoever the heck is part of this. See, the daily fantasy sports model was going to work on its own. It was swelling and it was developing legs and it had an army and legions of people supporting it, and it didn't need to go off the cliff here with this aggressive approach to marketing that, in my opinion, when I'm sitting there watching the game on a Sunday with my brother, I look at him and I say, the federal government's going to get involved with this stuff. It's just a given. This is turned fantasy football into gambling. It absolutely is gambling. And the federal government is going to get involved, and they're going to want to see how is this industry managed and maintained? Should it be regulated? And it was going to create a Pandora's box. All of a sudden, they pretty much did it to themselves already. And here we go, a couple weeks into the football season, and the New York Times or whatever other outlets were involved leaked this article about these insiders beating the system. It really is a shame, and as you know, this is coming from a guy who's been playing fantasy football. This is the 26th year of my keeper league. Well, I shouldn't say that. We're in year 18 of the keeper league, but 26th year of the same league with all the same guys. And it's part of my football experience. And it's just a shame that this concept of daily fantasy sports has gotten so out of control that now we're reading in the newspaper about insider trading analogies. I mean, it's ridiculous. So please, NFL or Fox, CBS, ESPN, whoever is involved, can you take it down a notch? Can you take a step back and give us all a break? We get it. We can go on our app, we can pick players, we can bet money, and we might win a few dollars on a football Sunday. We know, we get it, we got it. We can use the rest of the season to just deal with the Doritos and Pepsi commercials. You could take the daily fantasy sports stuff, put it on the back shelf for a little while. Join me next week as I will go through the world of football, fantasy football, NFL draft for another episode of 3 and Out. Hopefully I'll have a guest lined up. If not, again, we'll be riding solo. And again, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Follow me on Twitter. Make sure you follow all the guys on Draft Breakdown that contribute to Draft Breakdown. Make sure you get their Twitter handles. Give them a follow. And again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.